I think if you look at the strongest cases as a group, that the best explanation for them is that thoughts, emotions, sometimes even physical trauma can sometimes carry over from one life to another. Now, Ian Stevenson has said that, again, the best explanation, but not the only one, is that reincarnation is the best explanation, though not the only one, for the strongest cases. In my book, I haven't specifically used the term reincarnation because we don't even know what that means exactly, and we can't tell from our cases what that means exactly. But what we can say is that there's good evidence that, again, thoughts and emotions do seem to be able at times to carry on after the body dies and then show up again in a child.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways. I mean, because well, maybe just ask you directly. Therefore, you consider what you're doing science, and it's in the way you understand that.
Well, we certainly are using the scientific approach. I mean, we go in with no assumptions and no, religious axes to grind or whatever. We're just trying to look at this phenomenon, to understand it, and to see if there's evidence there that we need to consider that, whether you call it reincarnation or whatever, that's some part of us may be able to continue after the death of the body and then continue on in another life.
It looks like to me then, you can argue that you can't prove this under laboratory conditions, or you can't prove it's reincarnation in a way, but which may be true. But there's I think there's a lot of things in the scientific world that you can't necessarily prove under laboratory conditions. You can't prove that there's multiple universes. You can't prove certain things in physics under laboratory conditions. I mean, it's just there's a lot. Maybe beyond that level of proof, even though ideally you'd want that.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like to me, in looking at the case for survival or the case for reincarnation and taking in the evidence that you have accumulated and looking at some of the other evidence in other areas, that it's almost, if you think of it more as of what would be reasonable proof or reasonable in a court case or something of that standard, where you're taking a whole conglomeration of evidence from all different parts and really looking at what would a reasonable person conclude here from that evidence.
Well, I think
then what? Where do you stand?
Well, I think we're to the point. It's sort of looking at a criminal case versus civil, whereas criminal is beyond a reasonable doubt, where civil is just preponderance of the evidence. Well, I think I don't know that we're to the point of beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think if you look at a preponderance of the evidence, certainly with these cases, again, the best explanation may not be the correct one, but the best one based on the evidence is that things can carry over from one life to the next.
A lot of people say, and I've come across this, that's anecdotal. It's true. A lot of this is anecdotal, and a lot of but at some point the sheer overwhelming quantity of the anecdotal reports and evidence has to weigh in your considerations of what's true and your considerations of conclusions, I think.
Well, I mean, after a while you move from anecdote to at least case series, and 2,500 gets you to that. And it used to be anecdotal that French farmers were complaining that the rocks were falling out of the sky and landing on their farms, and the scientists completely scoffed at it because how can rocks fall from the sky because there aren't any rocks in the sky? And then, once you figure out what meteorites are, then of course you needed to be paying attention to what these farmers were saying. But until you have a theory where you can make sense of it, you just ignore the anecdotes.
Right. What do you think is the significance of understanding? And you've answered this to some degree, but of understanding the idea of reincarnation, the idea, why might that be important in terms of our culture, or why might that be significant?
I think there are a couple of ways of looking at that. One is the fact that in Asian cultures, there are ones where they essentially accept reincarnation as fact, but as a as a fella in India told Ian one time, they still have just as many rogues and villains over there as we do here.
Exactly. So I've heard that argument a lot, that if we weren't afraid of life, of death in the same way, we would be better people. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really.
I'm not idealistic enough to think that this work is going to change the world.
Yeah.
But I do think that if people are, I think the take-home message of this work, beyond the specifics of how the process may work or whatever, the take-home message is that it is part of the evidence that indicates that consciousness is something that may be separate from the brains, that may exist before we're born and continue after we die. And you hope that that people can use that knowledge, if it eventually becomes accepted knowledge, can use that to sort of work on themselves and to be less materialistic and less concerned about the earthly pleasures or day-to-day competition or whatever.
Right, sure.
But I mean, the best hope would be it's an opportunity that some people could use to to work on bettering themselves.
Well, I guess on the other side of the argument, from the hey, they believe in reincarnation and they're just as bad off, I mean, I guess I could see another side of the argument saying, well, but the impact reincarnation might have in this culture, in a very materialistic culture, in a very wealthy, affluent, materialistic kind of culture, might be interesting, might be different. It might push things forward in an interesting way.
Well, it might, but of course, this is a culture where a lot of people are religious, and
right, sure.
Again, we've got plenty of things that
it would definitely challenge a lot of the religious doctrines of this country.
Well, that's true, but I was just thinking more. I mean, there are people who have a spiritual life, and
sure.
Or
it's
a spiritual
like
side, at least.
Religious, moral, spiritual side.
Yeah, and they have these beliefs, and then at the same time you look at our culture overall, and there are a lot of parts about it that are not very good.
Right, sure.
And that will undoubtedly continue.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think we did it.
I think we pretty much covered things.